Good afternoon. Welcome to Coordinating with Families in a Virtual Environment, a how-to guide for speech-language pathologists. I'm Maggie Serbalowski. I'm a consultant at Patton, and I will be moderating this discussion. Before we begin, a few quick reminders. This session is being recorded. The recording will be posted to Schoology as soon as possible. Due to the size of today's session, we ask that all participants keep their microphone and camera disabled unless it is needed. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the presenter, Jennifer Geibel from Patton.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Geibel, like Maggie said, and I'm out of the Patton Pittsburgh office. And today we're going to be talking about collaborating with families in a virtual environment, a how-to guide for SLPs. Hopefully you can see my screen. If you don't, just put a message in chat. We always start our sessions by sharing the mission of Patton. And our mission at Patton, the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. Now, if we looked at the numbers across the state of Pennsylvania as far as kids who are enrolled in special education services, a large number of them receive speech language services. So we have our speech only kids who are identified throughout the state, and that usually is around 12 to 14% of our students in special ed, so thousands of children. But we also have students who have a primary disability of something else, perhaps autism or an intellectual disability, who also receive speech language services. So many of our children receive speech language services, making you guys, SLPs, really important within this special education process. We also, at the beginning of our presentations, always share our commitment to the least restrictive environment. We share this mission with PDE, and our goal is to ensure that every child is considered first for the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services prior to considering a more restrictive environment. And again, communication is a very important component of that. All right, so a little bit about me. When Maggie asked whether I wanted to be introduced, I decided I would do that on my own. Hopefully, I know many of you out there. I've been on many speech meetings throughout the last 5 years. I've been an educational consultant with Patton since 2015. I am a speech language pathologist myself. Previous to that, I was a music therapist. As an SLP, I worked in many different venues. So I was in the education world, I was in the medical world. I also did virtual therapy. So I kind of have worn many hats that maybe you also wear. I am a supervisor of special education, and I also have my doctorate in special education. And probably my most outstanding qualification, at least what I feel is my greatest qualification, is I am a mom to 3 kids, 3 boys, and one of my children receives special education services, and he is a speech student. So I have played the role of the family member as well. And here is my family. And just to, put up a really goofy picture, that's us. So my little one there, who is R2D2, he is a speech language student, and he receives services in school and also in the medical model. If you look at speech across the state of Pennsylvania, Patton has a speech representative in all the offices, and you maybe already heard Tammy. She just gave a great presentation. Tammy's in the Eastern region, I'm in the Western, and Beth Christopher is in the Central region. And now I'd like to take a moment to hear who you are. So I have a poll of just a couple questions that I'd like to share with you. And what I'd like you to do is, as you're taking this poll, answer all the questions using the best answer and scroll down to reach the rest of the questions. Sometimes you only see one and you think there's no more. There are actually 2. So make sure you scroll downward. And I'm going to ask Maggie to go ahead and show that poll whenever she is able. And the purpose of the poll is to just give us an idea of whom is on the line. Okay, whoops, I'm not seeing the poll come up. Let's see if Maggie's able to share it.
You should see the first question.
All right. Okay, it looks like a lot of people are answering in the chat instead of on the poll. That's okay. So it looks like overwhelmingly we have SLPs here. Many SLPs, but a couple teachers, a couple family members. Yeah, somebody said they're not seeing the poll. I don't see it either. I'm not sure it's been launched, but so basically I wanted to know your role. If we can't launch the poll, that's okay. So it looks like we're predominantly SLPs, but some teachers. All right.
Can we just do it in the chat?
Yeah, that's fine. And our next question for the poll was, what are your school's reopening plans for the fall? So are you going to be back at school full time? You're totally back in person. Are you doing virtual only? A hybrid model? There's a lot of hybrid models out there. Are you a cyber school already? So this is old hat for you, perhaps. Or do you have some other model that I didn't think of? Because it's amazing how different everyone's plans are. So looking in the chat, it looks like many of you are virtual, many of you are hybrid. Interestingly, it looks like some of you are virtual for now, but then looking at hybrid for the next semester. And it does look like also many of you have full virtual options, even if you are going back to school. So it seems that families have been given a choice to enroll in cyber as well. Not everyone knows yet. So do not feel as if you're alone if you yet have not been told your plan. It seems like there are a lot of plans that haven't been solidified yet. So thank you. All right, so most of you seem like you're going to have some sort of virtual component there, which makes this session pretty pertinent. Oh, I love this comment by someone. It changes on a weekly, if not a daily basis. I hear you. Even just for my own children going back to school, it's kind of crazy right now. All right. Okay, so in light of the fact that it does look like most of you are going to be doing virtual learning, I have a couple resources here that I just wanted to share. So one is our tele-intervention checklist for parents and families. This is a checklist that you can give to your family members. It's a working checklist. You can literally put a checkbox on it if you use it on Word. And this can be shared with your families just so they are able to prepare more fully for a tele-intervention session. And this is on our Padlet that I know Beth Christopher is going to share with you later. We have many resources on the Padlet that you can access. And then the other resource I had here was created by our Family Engagement Initiative at Padden. And this is lessons learned from virtual learning during COVID-19. We created one of these both for families and for educators because we all learned within this process, right? This was definitely a situation in which many of us had to encounter situations we had never been in before. It was new to all of us. So we did learn as we went along, made some mistakes, did some great things. So I have that here. And I'm actually going to open up the link to that just to show it to you. So you should see it there. And this is a resource for you. So it's from families and educators, but this is for you. Things that families have expressed worked well for them, that educators have expressed worked well. So do feel free to access that. And that is also on the Padlet. All right, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. All right. I'm getting many messages in the chat. So I'm going to move that around. Okay. All right, so here we are. And we will be sharing resources as we go through our presentation. All right, so our objectives for today. Today, we want to talk about how we can establish a strong rapport with families. We'll identify tools to support collaborative relationships and share experiences so we can learn from each other. So we're going to leave time for question and answer at the end. That can also be time in which you can share. However, feel free to share information as we go. We're interested in hearing from you. You can put your thoughts into the chat. That's fine. All right, so first of all, engaging all families. Most of us have the idea that family involvement increases students' academic achievement and also their achievement in speech, right? But why is it important and how is it important? Well, to begin this discussion, I'd like to share some information from our Family Engagement Initiative at Patton. So in our office, I am the lead on both speech and family engagement. And I have completely drank the Kool-Aid of family engagement and seen family engagement be a vital piece of the puzzle when we're working with children with disabilities and children in general. So what we consider family engagement in Patton is family engagement promotes equitable partnerships among schools, families, and communities to actively support student achievement through shared commitment, decision-making, and responsibility. And let's dissect that a little bit. So when we look at family engagement, it indicates partnerships, that we are all on the same playing field. We are all members of the IEP team who have something vital to contribute. And we consider families part of that, a really important part of that, that they can share information that the rest of us can never know regarding their children. Now, there are a lot of laws in place that encourage us to engage in family engagement. IDEA, of course, does. Families are the first person listed as being a required member of the IEP team. IDEA describes parents, but then defines parents as including any major caregiver for that child who has an educational interest. We also see this in Every Student Succeeds Act, the PA State Performance Plan, the Danielson Framework, which we use for evaluation often, Component 4C, that's all about families. How are we communicating with our families? And also the PA System for Principal Effectiveness. Within family engagement, we have some core beliefs. First of all, we believe that all families, not some of them, all families have dreams for their children and they want what's best for them. Now, I have worked with a lot of families over the years, both as a music therapist and an SLP in all sorts of places. And I can honestly say that I've never met a family member who wanted their child to fail. I don't think any of us ever walk into an IEP meeting where some of the members of that team are thinking, how can we really screw this up? No, we want our children to succeed, all of us, and our families want their children to succeed. Number two core belief, all families have the capacities to support their child's learning. And this is a hard one for some of us because we do see some families who have unique challenges, right? But they do all have the capacity to help their kids, and they are in the best position to do so because they understand facets of their child's life that we can never see. Also, number three, families and school staff are equal partners. Here's an important one. So this is recognizing that it's not enough to have a family member attend an IEP meeting and listen and sign the papers. We want them to be sharing information, to be actively participating in discussion. They need to be engaged. So we'll be talking about what that means in a virtual environment. And then last, the responsibility for cultivating and sustaining partnerships among school, home, and community rests primarily with school staff, especially school leaders. So this is where we all come in as school staff. Now we have some family members out there in the crowd, right? But we have a lot of school staff members here, educators and SLPs. And it's really our responsibility to start these discussions with families. We need to be ready to have conversations, to engage families in discussion, in problem solving. That is really important. And the onus is really on us to take that step. When we look into the research, successful partnerships between home and school are based on a few components. First of all, they're focused on relationships. So we're not looking at students as numbers or as something abstract. We're looking at how do we relate with the families of the student. They're also strength-based. So identifying not only the strengths that the student has, but also that the family has, which may be something that we don't always do as a system. So looking instead of at maybe some concerns they have, looking at what are they bringing to the table, very important. This is also systemic. So us as SLPs, we're not the system, right? We're one cog within a system that's really intricate. So we can't always invoke systemic change, but family engagement should be part of our system. We should consider it for all of the students we interact with. It's a collaborative partnership. It's where we ask families for advice. We treat them as partners. It's learning driven. So we're always looking at the next step. Where are we going? And it's also sustained. So this doesn't end after open house night or even after we've established a good relationship with a family. It has to be continuous throughout the child's education. When we're looking at how we establish strong partnerships, there are a few steps that we can take to make this easier. One, we need to create a welcoming environment. We have to provide opportunities for partnerships. We need to have time for collaboration. So that could be something as simple as giving an extended time for an IEP meeting instead of just an hour because you know you have a lot of issues to discuss. It could also mean taking time out to give families regular phone calls. We move from involvement to engagement. So what's the difference? Well, involvement implies that someone is there, they're checking a box, but they might not actually be engaged in the activity that's happening. So we want families to be engaged. And probably number one in my book is improve communication with families. In order to have a good relationship, we have to communicate with families in a way that works for them. And we'll talk later about how flexibility and communication is really important because not all our families will talk to us in the same way. All right, so we're going to pull out a couple of those and troubleshoot them. So what about a welcoming environment? Well, in family engagement, we've always identified what a welcoming environment looks like when you're in a school. And this might mean having signs in every language or you making sure that there's someone to welcome families as they come into the school building. But how does this look in a virtual environment? Well, first of all, our families need to be able to connect to the environment. And I know that this seems obvious, but this was a problem that we saw during the pandemic. Not all families are able to connect virtually at adequate internet speeds. So what does this mean for us? Well, basically families, some of them don't have internet access at all, right? Okay, that's kind of its own issue. We think of other ways to reach those families. Some families have internet access, but maybe not the bandwidth to do live streaming. So depending on what you're trying to do with that family, if you're perhaps trying to have a Zoom meeting, for example, they might not have a lot of success with that. So that's when we have to troubleshoot, is there a better way of connecting to this family? Maybe we don't start with a Zoom meeting, maybe we start with a phone call home. If we're using a Zoom meeting, maybe we limit the resources necessary to make that meeting happen. So we always have to first figure out, can we even connect? Next, does the family know how to use and access the virtual content? This is important as well. In the event that you're doing speech online, and it seems like many of you are, you're probably using some sort of platform. And whether that's Skype, Google Meets, Zoom, they all have different ways of interacting. They have different engagement techniques. They might have a whiteboard, a hand raise. They might have a chat box, a Q&A. It depends on the platform. It's very important that the families know how to access that platform and use it. And therefore, as a therapist, again, looking at that requirement of family engagement that we as the school have to take that first step, we might have to teach that. So creating that welcoming environment first requires a lot of patience as we walk families through, how do I use this? What does it mean for me? How can I help my child be active and engaged? We also create a welcoming virtual environment when the families are able to see you. And this actually might be vital into building that relationship. It can be hard for families to build a relationship with someone when they can't see their face or interact with them in what we would consider a traditional way, like having a conversation, kind of like we are right now. Now, internet speeds may influence whether you're able to virtually stream a video. That's true. But if you can do it, I would recommend it. I had a family member call in recently, really frustrated because she's a family member of a child with a hearing impairment. And she's just beside herself because the school district in which she's working, you know, that she's working with, will not put faces up on the screen. Now, this is a rule of that LEA. We always say, whatever your LEA, your local education agency, says to do, that's what you do. They employ you. But in this case, it was really detrimental to this student because they needed to be able to read the lips of the teacher, of the speech language pathologist. So not having the faces up there, that made things really difficult. And that's true too, just when you're hoping to make an emotional connection. So do try to put a live stream video up whenever possible. If you can't, I would at least put up a still photograph. Next, creating a virtual welcoming environment. Families need to be made to feel at ease through empathy and understanding. So what does that mean? Well, I think all of us sort of got a crash course in empathy and understanding whenever in March we suddenly had to do our work from home, because we all found ourselves facing unique challenges that maybe we hadn't before. Personally, I have 3 children. I had 2 in middle school, 1 in the elementary school. They were using different means to complete their schoolwork. I was still working full time. It was a juggling act, and all our families are going through the same thing. So anything you can do to understand their home life, be empathetic, ask them questions, figure out who the stakeholders are, very important. And along with that, we have to understand the time and stress demands being placed on families. So let's say we are working with a speech student from a family. It's quite possible that there are other children within that family. So a time that we choose to hold that child's therapy session might not work for the family if they have another child that already has a therapy session at that point, or already has a class that's being live streamed, because they might not have the bandwidth to actually have those competing live streaming sessions at the same time. So we always have to think about that. So what are some virtual tools for digital welcomes? Well, when we think about how we welcome our students, sometimes we do it with a phone call. I've known people who've sent letters home. Those are all still viable options. There are ways, though, to introduce yourselves to families if you are a little more theatrical, and these are digital ways that you can use. So Flipgrid, Seesaw, these are ways of creating a video of something. So this video might be something as basic as explaining what an SLP is, what the plans are for the fall. Screencastify is another one, as is Open Broadcaster software, and Explain Everything. Explain Everything's kind of cool. It's like a whiteboard. So you could write words on Explain Everything, do drawings, and you might use these virtual tools just to explain, this is who I am. I'm going to be your child's SLP. This is what we're going to be working on. And these can be pretty easy to use once you mess around with them a little bit. When we think about ways that we used to welcome people, so we talked about, you know, the letter, the welcome phone call. In the research, we find 3 of these things identified all the time. The welcome phone call is really important. Home visits. Home visits are actually one of those components that has a lot of research back up behind it. Home visits are valuable for building family-school relationships. But we find ourselves thinking, how would we do that in a virtual environment? How do we do back to school night in a virtual environment? And again, back to school night, important. It allows the families to glimpse what's happening in the classroom. So how do we use those in a virtual environment, and what changes could you make to help these succeed? I'd like to take a moment and get your thoughts on this. So if you had to adapt one of these things for a virtual environment, how might you do it? And maybe let's think of a home visit. How would you do a virtual home visit, or has anyone done this? And I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to put things in chat if you like, and then I do have a resource to share. Okay, I don't see a lot coming up in chat, which means perhaps you're bewildered as to how to do a virtual home visit. Interestingly, like I said, home visits are really, really research-based. They work. You want to establish a relationship, do a home visit. Now, do we do them ordinarily? Some districts do. It just depends. It depends on the rules of the district. But we probably can do virtual home visits even more than regular ones, right? Because we don't have the travel component, the time involved in that. We're not going to unfamiliar neighborhoods because we're all on our computer. So what can we learn from each other during a home visit, and how does seeing each other's homes help build rapport? Well, I was at a conference this summer on family engagement and actually increasing equity as well. And they talked about how these visits were fantastic in that they really allowed people to build a relationship based on actual knowledge of each other, how we lived, what our house looked like. Did we have any common interests? You know, did we both have a dog? Do we both have siblings? Are there 4 children in our household and their household? So it looks like some people are adding some ideas. Okay, so some people are doing Zoom meets where we virtually enter the home. That's great. Google platform, Google Meets. Oh, this is really cute. I had the child do a tour of their bedroom with their parents present so they could talk about what their room was like. Really cool. Okay, so somebody said they were told kids may not want to show how they live, and to not force people to show their homes. That's a really good point. We shouldn't ever force anybody to share their home. I know my home, but we should give them the option if our school districts are okay with that. And one thing to think about is, you know, having worked in many venues in speech, I've done early intervention, and I don't know how many of you out there have done early intervention. I'm actually curious if you could raise your hand or give a yes or thumbs up that you've done early intervention. I only bring this up because that's one mode of speech, and many have. Okay. We're in the homes anyway, in early intervention. And oh, someone says, I love and miss EI. Yeah. Okay, I loved EI as well. One of the best things about EI was you did go in a lot of homes. Not all the time. You also went to daycares, you went to preschools. But there were many times that you wound up in a home. And the things that, you know, we would notice in our homes were, you know, I might go into a home and it's really just a family just making things work. And I think you get very comfortable kind of sharing somebody else's environment when you do that. And a virtual home visit does the same thing. Now, we do have an individual on the line who's saying that she's in the middle school and the kids worry about others judging their homes. And that's fine. Then you don't have to do a tour of the child's bedroom. Absolutely. Middle school's a hard time, right? I remember my son coming home from middle school and saying, I have to get these $200 shoes because that's what everybody's wearing. And I said, you know, no, we don't have the money for that. But for him, it was really important, and it was a valid concern because he wanted to fit in. So yeah, middle school's tough. I would encourage you could still do a home visit without exploring the home. You could have the child up against a blank wall and just talk to each other. So even if you're not looking around the room, I mean, all you see for me right now is my pattern logo. If I had that turned off, I'm in my office with a green screen behind me. I'm not really showing you much. I have done sessions in my dining room, and then you can see people walking around. But you don't have to show off rooms. I love this idea that someone has on here about showing off their pets. Dogs, cats, little brothers and sisters are good that way. Even a drawing they made, their stuffed animals. Any of these things would be good to share. I'm just going back into the chat because I know we had a couple suggestions. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, I love this one. I'm not sure who this is, but this was a great share. I did a scavenger hunt, i.e. having kids bring a few different items to the computer from various rooms in their house. Love that. Love it. Now, I've actually done a lot of virtual therapy over the years, probably more than most of you did until March. And now you probably have me beat. But I've done a lot of virtual therapy, and scavenger hunts are great. They're great for just getting to know a student, for building language, and also for articulation. I love doing find 10 things that begin with R in your room, and I'm going to find 10 things in my room, and then we'll share them and do generalizations. Oh, I love this one too. I plan to have kids share and describe their book bags. Nice. So you see how we're kind of turning it away from the home environment and looking at something specific, something that the child would have to share. Awesome. I'm going to take you to this resource really quickly. So this should come up on your screen. This is a great resource that I found that is online. And also, I believe I put it on a Padlet that Beth Christopher will share later. So this is from an organization called Stand for Children. It's a how-to of virtual home visits. I will say that they must have an app that they promote, that they reference in this, but you don't have to use the app. You can do a home visit using whatever platform you usually use. So Zoom, Google, whatever you have going on. So the process of this is described, talks about why it's important. And then there's some testimonials about why home visits really worked. And what I liked about this is it sort of breaks it down. And I like that it said, the duration can vary, but we're looking at like 20 to 30 minutes, not an hour, which might help you fit it into your schedule a little more. And you would do it during the first grading period. And I've also known people do it early. So however you try to plan that, it is a good idea to, give that a try. And it looks like Roxanne participated on the chat, and she said she does an all about me through a Google group meet. So how cool is that? Just sharing a little bit of information through the Google group. Can you all see my screen where this resource came up? Just trying to make sure that, oh, some of you can and some of you can't, very odd. All right, I will make sure that that gets on the Padlet just so you are able to visit that, but it's a really good resource. Okay. All right. I'm going to go back to the slideshow. Okay. Actually, let me, I'm going to go to this and get the link, and I'll copy it into the chat so you can see it a little clearer. All right, you should be able to access it that way if you want to take a look. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. All right, so when we were talking about those action steps for family engagement, creating a welcoming environment was one of them. And then communicating is perhaps, I feel, multiple, gives you like so many more benefits, is just establishing a communication process. So we have some action steps for communication. Now, these are ones that family engagement would share just in general, whether you're doing virtual or not. We can establish frequent ongoing communication, and we have to do that. This should happen immediately or before the start of school. So this is not something to wait on. And when we mean frequent, weekly, daily, whatever frequent means to you, whatever's the most helpful amount of communication. We need to ensure that a positive communication happens before a negative. And I think we've all gotten really good at this, because when we were contacting families to get them to participate in this virtual environment, we really were creating conversations early on just about, I'm glad to meet your child. you know, we're going to do great things. Like we were setting the stage for positivity, and we want that to occur before a negative and much more often too. We need to communicate in a variety of ways based on the needs of the family. So you are going to have families that communicate really well through texting. And I would encourage you to text with those families. I know personally myself, I am way better at texting than I am on the phone. So please, please text me, my child's therapist. I'll do much better. She actually tends to email, and I'm pretty good with email as well. But again, flexible based on the family. And then maintain courteous, timely, and professional interactions regardless of the type of communication. And this means that if somebody's really upset and they're kind of, you know, not happy with something, just listening to them and saying, I'm very sorry you feel that way. Always remaining that professional that you have learned to be. Okay, I'm looking at the chat and I see a couple of notes. And I did not miss this question that was there either, but I'm going to get back to that later. So we see here, Google Groups is a great place to put parent emails to allow for frequent communication. If you use Remind in the past, Google Groups works great. Oh, okay. So somebody's asking, do you share your personal cell number? And that depends on your comfort level. In the past, I have shared my personal cell number with my families. I've never had an issue, honestly, but you don't have to. So we're actually going to skip that poll for now. One of the things that you can do, I'm just moving down to some tools, is someone mentioned Remind. Remind is a great way to cloak your text. Another one is Clasting. Google also does it, and that's Google Voice. So one thing on Google Voice, people were experiencing in the spring that depending on how you signed up for Google Voice, which is, it cloaks, once again, it cloaks your number. So if you're texting, if you're calling people, they get a Google Voice number and not a personal cell number. One thing people were experiencing was that if they were on a certain plan through their school district, they might be charged per message or per call for Google Voice. And this wasn't a good thing, because if you literally have thousands of students, that adds up. So check with that. You may want to sign up for Google Voice in a different way, but talk to your school about what the limitations are. Remind, I've used in the past, it works really well. I've had teachers use that with me. It cloaks your number for texting, so does Clasting. Class Dojo is another way of interacting. Oh, we see some other ones on here. Boomerang, that's a Google Chrome extension. That'll send an email or text. Oh, somebody loves Class Dojo. I do too. It's so wonderful for communicating with families. And it can also get families on board with like positive behavior, which is a really great thing. It looks like someone has used Jive for phone calls, and in that, oh, this is good. So it looks like maybe the phone calls are not only cloaked, the numbers, but all the calls are recorded. So you have your documentation right there. Text Now, and Text Now is an app. Thank you, Tammy. Oh, I love this. Class Dojo is a lifesaver if you have families who don't speak English. Absolutely, because it has a translator built in. And it says here we use talking points, which oh, that's another automatically translated program. Oh, here's a question to the group. Has anyone used Class Tag? So if you've used that and want to write a note, please do. Dean's List, and that is a translator feature. Cisco Jabber, and the calls occur as if we were on campus. Cool. All right. I have that too at my work. Like my number from my office is transferred, so it comes through to my personal cell. Works really well, but everybody just calls my office number and then, you know, reaches me on my personal cell. Thank you, everyone. If anyone has information on Class Tag, put it in chat, because we had a question on that. No, I haven't used that one. All right, let's just go back a little bit. When we're looking at digital communication, just a couple things to be aware of. Know your school's policy and procedures, because everybody has different ones. Schools might not want you giving out your personal number, even if you're comfortable with it. Just figure out what the rules are. Make sure you know how to use various digital communication types so you can mix it up in case, for example, like you have a family who doesn't do texting. Provide families training on the use of the communication platform if they need it. So this might be just an extra session in addition to speech, or maybe you take the first few minutes of a speech session and kind of talk them through how to use these. They might need to know how to access certain things like websites, if you want them to connect to a video, anything like that, just walk them through it and vary the types of communication based on the information you want to share. So there are things that are great to share in a text, such as, oh, you're a couple minutes late for the session. Are you still logging on? That's a great texting topic. Not a good texting topic would be if something seriously negative had occurred. You don't want to text that, you probably want to call. So just think about that. There have been lots of studies on this, on which communication works best with families, and it's highly variable, and it does change based on situation. And there are some concerns for digital communication specifically. As always, does your family have access to it? You might think all my families have email. They might never check that email. And this might be for a variety of reasons. Maybe that they use their phone as their primary means of accessing the internet, and the email just might not come to that easily, whereas they can text easily. The digital communication, does it support two-way interaction? So this is an important one. Are we able to have a conversation using that digital interaction? If not, we might want to use another way, because we might want to have a conversation. And does the family know how to engage in a digital conversation? Can they access it and keep the replies going? And here were some of those tools. When you do decide to select a tool, find one that works for you, but understand that not every parent may use it. So if you pick a tool and you worked really hard on this, everybody at your school uses this, maybe it's Remind, and you've learned how to use it and you think it's fabulous, there's probably going to be one family that doesn't use it for whatever reason. And it doesn't matter what the reason is. In that case, find something that works for that family. Sometimes it is just a matter of that they don't know how to do it, and you might have to walk them through it. Use tools that are common to your school when possible, though. So it is a lot better if you're the SLP and you work with an OT, a PT, a special educator, and you're all using that same tool. Way less confusing for the family. And then collaborate with your other service providers when you choose the tool, because they might have some good ideas on that. All right, so it says class tag is similar to Class Dojo and it works well. Thank you for contributing that, great. Now I had a question up here, way up here, and it's not necessarily in the realm of what we're talking about right now, but it is a worthy question. It says, do you have multiple families from your caseload together, and what about FERPA and HIPAA? Whenever we get a question like that, we really always have to refer you to your school district's policies. And I know that that sounds like I'm just not taking a stand, but each district has different policies on that. Now, that said, I know that many districts have had success having groups. In other words, having 4 children working together in an RTIC group in a virtual session, meaning that 4 different households are being shown in that session. Now, what I've seen some schools do is perhaps they have rules. Maybe they encourage people to go up against a blank wall, so you're not seeing everybody's home, or even seeing, out the window where you could tell what their neighborhood is. That would be my suggestion for you, would be to just start that conversation with your supervisor, because you're not the only one asking it. I am sure that other people have the same concerns. That said, if it is a FERPA and HIPAA issue, if that has you concerned, again, reach out to your districts. I've seen districts handle this in different ways. I've seen them respond. Perhaps they ask the parent to sign a document that says they're not going to videotape that session and share it with other people. This is to protect the confidentiality of the student. Oh, it looks right here, somebody did that. We had parents sign a waiver saying they understand their child will be seen and that they will see other children as well, and that all information is confidential. Absolutely, that works great. So when it comes down to it, you have to think to yourself, HIPAA and FERPA are important, but they are not the only things to consider. We have to be thinking about how best do we provide services to these children. And if a group environment is going to be the best thing, we should be doing a group environment. We just have to be creative about it. Thank you for asking that question, because I'm sure that was on many people's minds. All right. We have about 15 minutes left, and then we'll have time for more questions. But keep putting them in the chat. I just will kind of answer them as they fit appropriately. Oh, and I like this addition. If you're having a group session and kids are timid, they can use the chat window to respond, just if they're a little shy about speaking out. Good suggestion. All right. So once we get our families involved, so let's assume we've created a welcoming environment, we're communicating regular. Now we actually have to have speech, which is, you know, the hard part, right? Scheduling is always murder for speech at the beginning of the school year. I have been where you are. I am sure that everybody else has been in the same boat where you just think, how do I get the schedule to work? And now we're adding a virtual component to it, which may make it easier if you don't have transportation to fit in there, or it might make it more difficult, because here are the things we have to think about. Of course, IEP requirements, always. Right. It's not enough to say something like, well, we're only in school 2 days a week, so maybe we should only see this child once a week. Even though they have 2 times a week in their IEP, but that's going to be really hard. We really have to think instead about being creative. You know, do we need an in-person session? So then maybe we have that once a week and a virtual session in the rest of the week, but still giving that child the time they need. What are the IEP requirements? What are the service delivery types? Now you might be thinking to yourselves, if you're doing 100% virtual, well, duh, my service delivery type is going to be tele-intervention because I don't have any other options. And that's true. But service delivery isn't just the mode of how we have a session. It's also who else is in the session. So do we have an individual or a group? Do we have perhaps push-in into a classroom? And I've seen some wonderful examples of how schools have done push-in. So if a child is participating in a live streaming course, where they're, you know, in a classroom, could the SLP support the student during that? Something to consider. That way they're not missing that class and they're being supported in something that's really impacting their education. We also think, does the child have the necessary supports? So not only do we have to consider our schedule, we have to think of the families. Again, if we try to schedule something for a family when their other child has OT and another child is live streaming a class, it's not going to be successful. Do they have the internet bandwidth to support our session being the time that we want it to be? Is there a family member to support them if they need it? Now, I will say family members are frustrated and they are overwhelmed. I was speaking with a mom a couple months ago who was saying to me, you know, I'm just not sure about my child doing virtual therapy. He's supposed to have 4 times a week. I don't know if I can do it. And she was a very devoted mother. Her husband was a doctor and he was working 24/7 because he had no time off given the pandemic. And she said, I can't just do therapy. Now her son had autism. He had OT, PT. He had various special educators wanting to see him, VSC. And she said, I need time to just be a mom sometimes, to just give him a hug or to make lunch. Those normal mom things that you have to do just to survive. So we have to think about our parents and what else they have going on. And that's what I mean by the availability of learning coaches. Who is going to walk that child through this session if something goes wrong, if the internet fails, if you know, they maybe need somebody to kind of keep them on track behaviorally. And then think also of their school schedule, because if schools are live streaming, you might be limited in when you can get in to see that student if you're not pushing into the classroom. All right, so when you're doing scheduling, here are some virtual tools. Sign Up Genius I've used. Basically lists out all your available times and your families can pick one. Very easy, very, very easy. Doodle is a poll where you might ask them to give you the options that will work for them. And then there are innumerable Chrome extensions, which I can't even get started in sharing with you because there are so many of them. They just last and last. So keep these in mind. If you need a virtual scheduling tool to keep everybody organized, these are all good ways. Cogsworth was recommended by several people. So if anybody has anything to say about these, please do. But these are all possible ways that you can sign people up. Oh, this is a good one. Is Sign Up Genius confidential? It was when I used it, but I'm not sure if that's a specific setting you have to put on it. Does anyone know offhand whether that has to be set up in advance? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone respond, Kelly, but when I used it, it was because the other information from other users was cloaked. Like I couldn't see their names. Okay, so Tammy agrees it's a setting. I would think that you have to put that setting in from the beginning. I'm not sure it comes up automatically as private. So definitely resource source that. When? Oh, okay, so we have some questions. Where is the handout? I believe the handout was put out early on in the session as a link. Maybe Maggie, you could put that out again. And we also have our Padlet of resources. And okay, so it looks like it is a setting on Sign Up Genius. So just make sure you click that setting. It looks like this person is also asking when the session will be available to review again. It is being recorded and you will have access to it. I don't know how long it will take, maybe a few weeks. Sometimes it takes time to close caption. And Maggie has put out the handout code again. All right, thank you. All right, we have about 8 minutes more of presentation, but please take time to talk and we can just kind of carry this over. All right, so we talked about some of your digital tools. Oh, okay, it says somebody's using Canvas for scheduling. Okay. If you've had trouble getting the PowerPoint on Schoology, we'll make sure that that's on there when this session is done. Oh, this is great. So somebody is saying that if you're seeing kids in a class, Zoom breakout groups are great because you can kind of break out and work on different tasks with your students as they're participating in a class session. All right, we're going to continue on. I wanted to briefly talk about family engagement and evaluation. When we all began working from home, we definitely saw some difficulties with doing that, right? You know, with suddenly doing all our sessions from home. But there were also some wonderful things. And one of them was the fact that all of a sudden, many of us were interacting with families a lot more than we did before, maybe. I remember it was hard for me moving from the medical model to the educational model, because when I worked in the clinic, you met the families all the time because they brought the kids there. But when I was in education, it wasn't quite the same. Now, I worked in early intervention for a while. That was very family hands-on. But when I was in school age, you didn't have those same connections. Like, you really had to make those happen. Had to call people, you know, had to really reach out. So one of the things that we saw happening with this pandemic is that all of a sudden we had to communicate with our parents a lot just to get them to come to speech, because it was hard. It was hard for the families. It was hard for us. And this was good because it meant our families could provide us with some useful information. So all families can give good information about home life, about changes in family structure, you know, any family history, how the child's speech and language compares to same age peers, progress, regression. I like this one example of the student's best communications and most serious breakdowns. Because they will remember that one. I still remember my son's most serious communication breakdown. He was 4, I was crying, his brothers were crying, we couldn't figure out what he meant. Yeah, so you can get a lot of information from families. That's really important. So how do you do it? Well, you can interview. I would just do that on the phone before you're starting a student in speech. You can use recorded interaction. So if the family's comfortable with it and they want to share their child communicating, playing, reading a story, whatever it is, that can be really good information. You can give them a questionnaire or a scale like this one, the intelligibility and context scale, though I always encourage people to not just give people a number ranking of their children, because it's hard to describe your child in a number, but maybe to describe what those numbers mean. Portfolio, behavior support. So another way of getting your families involved is, you know, kind of talking to them about how they can support their child during an evaluation, or, you know, having them sit with their child during a virtual evaluation. That's very important. So I was going to do a quick Padlet. Oops, sorry. On the screen, we have a Padlet here, and I'm going to go over there. So I'm taking a link, and I will put this Padlet into the chat box. And I did hear from someone that they're not seeing the handouts on the Schoology. They will be there, so we'll make sure they're on there. Don't worry. I'm just going to put this link to everyone. So this is a Padlet, and I would like everybody to just share some information about questions that you found useful to ask families, maybe topics that you want to know about. And I'm going to go to the Padlet myself. So I'm going to share that screen. All right. If you've never used a Padlet, you just click on it. All right, we have people participating. Awesome. I'm going to add something. One thing that I've noticed with my own son and his speech is what educational impact his speech has had on his work from home, which I had never really thought about. He has a learning disability in reading as well, and benefits from using like text to speech, speech to text, and I never saw how much his speech was affecting his speech to text. All right, cool. So we have many questions here. What are motivating topics for your child to communicate about? So important. How do they request? How do they tell you what's happened? What's your child's biggest strength? Awesome one, because we always want to see what the child's doing really well. What do you want them to be able to communicate? Tell me about your child's daily routine. These are wonderful. Thank you. What percentage can you as a familiar listener understand? Wonderful. Okay, what are your concerns for your child in general? And that's great because that can help you prioritize those. What are their favorite activities? I had a student who loved football so much you could use football for absolutely any mode, right? It didn't matter. And then I had another little girl who loved chihuahuas, the little dogs. And if you just had a chihuahua somehow involved in your therapy, she would do anything. She worked so hard. Anything else you want to add to the Padlet? These are wonderful questions. Now I have this Padlet. So what I will do is I will keep this and share it within those Schoology documents. And you guys all have access to it too now that you have the link, so you could keep accessing it and adding more. All right, good, thank you guys. I'm gonna switch back to the presentation. And moving on. So then some digital tools to engage students and families during therapy. Now, first of all, engaging students and families during therapy, they don't have to be all digital, right? You can do non-digital things during therapy. Like you can still do movement activities during therapy. You know, I might still have a child who's working on R and I'm trying to get him to know what that strength feels like in his tongue. I might have him push really hard up against the wall. That's not digital, but it's still engaging and it's still getting a point across, right? However, there are a lot of digital tools to make therapy more engaging. Kahoot, which is a quiz. Poplet, that's a way of organizing information. Padlet, boom cards, flipped classroom, games, dice, spinners, any sort of spinner or dice that's those can be virtual, and they're free almost everywhere. And then also we have digital tools that assist with behavior and attention: timers, virtual schedules, emotional control apps, sequencing apps. And here are some very specific apps if you wanted to be able to find them easily. These are ones that people swear by. Visual timers are a really common one, and that will just count down your time in an activity. Focus timer, first then. Choice works is good because it lets the child kind of participate in what they want to do next. All right, I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick. Oh, okay, so we had some questions. Is Padlet an app? Padlet is actually a website. And now that you asked that, I'm not sure you can access it in an app. I've never tried to, but it is a website. Oh, are Zoom breakout groups HIPAA compliant? I'm actually going to say the same thing that I said before about HIPAA, which is that follow the rules your LEA uses. And when in doubt, get a waiver signed. But a breakout group, if it's just you working with your students, is actually more private than the whole Zoom group, which obviously the student is already participating in if they're in a classroom. Someone asked if the tele-intervention checklist is available in Spanish, and I am not sure if we had that translated yet. So that's something I will check on and add to the Padlet that Beth Christopher is going to announce later. Oh, can you use Padlet with parents via Zoom meeting? Absolutely. Yeah, you can use it in Zoom like I did and just share the link, or you can send it via an email. Okay, so students with Google Chromebooks could not engage interactively. Google Chromebooks are the worst devices for engaging interactively. And this is no, I don't have any stake in any of these, you know, in any particular device. They're just generally less accessible than others. When I'm using Zoom, students with Google Chromebook might have trouble interacting. And then also students who are using tablets can't always like drag and click if they need to be able to do that. To engage in therapy. So you're just gonna have to experiment with that. All right. Oh, visual timer. Okay, I'm gonna go back to, I'm not sure, somebody wants to see the last slide. So any of these digital tools assist with behavior and attention. I don't know if this is the slide you guys wanted because there's not a lot of info on there. Let's see. Just make sure. Yeah, I'm on the PowerPoint. And then these were some of the specific ones. All right, we are past 1:15, which is okay because we were going to use the last several minutes for questions. We were not doing breakout rooms. So I'm going to show a couple more slides and then just really leave it open for free questions. I had an individual approach me in the spring about how do we get families to help us gathering data. And so I thought that was a great question. When we involve families, obviously it increases their stake in what's going on, right? Their level of accountability. However, we do have to consider some things. One is time. And I know I've belabored this dead horse a lot, but we cannot discount the amount of time families are spending on activities to support their kids' learning right now. And they're often doing it while they're working full-time from home. It is not easy to do. I'm a single parent. I have 3 kids. And when I got to my end of days, you know, the end of my day, whenever my kids were in school and I had just worked and done everything else that needed to be done, I was just exhausted. It was exhausting. So think about parents' time. Think about how difficult the task is if you want them to gather data for you. Think about what they understand about cueing. So they might tell you, oh yes, this child can perform this task, but are they actually cueing it? And the child's not doing it independently. Think about their awareness. When we think of sound production, sometimes families don't hear differences in sounds because they're not trained to do that. That's not normal, right? We are the abnormal ones as SLPs because we have been trained to listen so minutely to sounds. Other people haven't, so that's something to think about. And then think about the ways in which you would gather data. You could have families do recordings of their kids. You could show them participating in stories, playing with their kids, doing games. You can have them do frequency counts, and there are apps for that, quite a few. Even have the family complete a little Likert scale of a smiley face, frowny face, where they're able to create, depending on what their goal is, say they're working on creating complete sentences. Did they do it? Thumbs up. Did they not? Thumbs down. So there are simple ways to engage families. I actually have a Microsoft Sway about doing that for our TIC that I can go ahead and share in the Schoology resources. All right, moving on, because we are almost at the end. So you also might want to think about how you share information with your families. Google Drive is a good way to do that. I have had speech students in the past that I've had a Google Drive with because their parents were particularly savvy. I've done Google Docs with them, Padlets, Poplets. Poplets are really good for organizing information, and you can share them. So that is a really good way to kind of share information, especially if you're working on something that's directly school related and you want the family to be able to access it later. All right, and then we get to speech homework, and isn't all work homework now? I mean, for many of us whose kids are working virtually, I've always had certain feelings about speech homework, like it has to be relevant, it has to be easy, you have to keep time constraints in mind, it needs to be motivating. Families have to know why it's important and how it will help, and it has to involve, you know, the whole family, or, you know, don't think of it just as something like mom or dad does, but can the brother or sister help out with it? Does it fit into the family's life? So whenever I, you know, used to do this, I used to say, please do not use worksheets, because in my own practice, I never saw worksheets being particularly successful. And they were in fact highly unsuccessful with my own child, because getting him to sit down and do a worksheet after school when he'd just done a million worksheets was not going to work. So I'm always like, no worksheets. So I did have a Padlet. I guess we have a few minutes left. Maggie, stop me if I'm doing something I'm not supposed to, but since you had 8 more minutes to do breakouts and we're not doing breakouts, let's look at the Padlet. And this was on alternative speech homework. So give me one moment. I'm actually gonna end the show. Oh, okay. Sorry, 1 second, because that ended my PowerPoint. So if we think about alternative homework should be pretty easy, such as, you know, something like, say your sister Katie's name 10 times a day. Let's see. All right, so here's a Padlet for this one, and we'll take our last couple minutes looking at this. So here are some ideas that people have added this to this Padlet before. Hopefully some of you guys can get on. So if we think of speech homework, again, given everything that families are dealing with, it has to be pretty easy and pretty fast. So here are some ideas for that.
Jennifer, some people are saying they can't get into the Padlet.
Oh.
Because it's private.
Okay. I'll change that. I apologize. I'm not sure why that was private. Change privacy.
And we have about 6 more minutes. And you have
Sure.
answered many of the questions in the chat. So I think we're
yeah. All right. Yeah, for summary. Okay, visitor can edit, can write. All right, you should be able to get onto it now because I have, wait, it's not secret. And you should be able to edit it now. We'll see if it works. If not, no sweat. We only have a couple minutes left, but we'll see if you can get on that. And I will share that screen. It looks like people are managing to get on it now. And I'll also check back for any questions. Oh, good. Yeah, so people are participating in that now. And as they participate, I'm actually going to look in the chat and see if there's any outstanding questions that we wanted to go over. All right. Thank you for letting me know you can get in there. Oh, this is a cool idea. So this individual, when they're taking data, has a Google slide for each student to record what they're doing. Cool. All right, there's some wonderful ideas coming up here, and I'm just perusing the chat. Oh, some complaints about Google Chromebooks. They can be hard, but they are the most inexpensive means of getting a laptop for kids. So districts use them a lot. You know, don't be mad at your districts because they probably did what they had to. But do be aware that there are some elements that may not work, like say on a Zoom meeting, if you're trying to use engagements like perhaps the whiteboard. So be careful with that. All right, it is 1:26. I'm going to give you guys one more minute to add some things to that. Oh, I love this. So have each child read aloud for 5 minutes from a text they're using in class and record to Flipgrid. That's cool. Just making sure that the child or the family knows how to use Flipgrid. A lot of people are using Flipgrid. Cool. Oh, record reminders for home practice. I like that because I would actually love to get a text that told me practice speech with Mikey, because sometimes I forget, and this is what I do for a living. Take the child outside and make a game board with their targets. Cool. All right, people are still contributing to this, which is awesome. So by all means, keep contributing. And again, I will make this Padlet link available on the Schoology account, so you'll be able to see it later. And you should just be able to keep adding to it as time goes by. All right, I'm going to go back to the chat and see if we have anything else. Oh, any help on parents providing answers to their child when collecting data? I guess I'm not totally sure. Oh, you mean the parents giving their kid the answer? Yes, that happens sometimes, and that's very hard in evaluation. You probably want to have a sit down with the parents prior to starting an evaluation or data collection, and just say to them, if it's just data collection, say, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be taking some data on whether or not Joey can answer these questions. So just make sure you let him do all the talking. You're probably going to have that conversation because, you know, I probably do too with my kids. Like sometimes we answer for our kids. It's a hard habit to break. So yeah, just give them some insight. All right, so that is the end of session 2E. I am going to sign out. It looks like some people are asking if this is the third session. This is still 2E, so we're moving on. But thank you all for participating in this session, and I look forward to seeing many of you at our next session with Beth Christopher, and I wish you good luck with the school year. Thanks everyone so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you for taking the time to share with us today. As you know, we are coming down to the last 2 minutes of this session, so if you are staying for the next one, please feel free to stay around. If not, you can move on to your next session.